the Christian's table and the choices of food, drinks that honors God. And we know the Bible says that we are called to glorify God in every aspect of our lives. There are so many angles, there are so many sides of our lives, but in all of these lives, in all of these angles, we are to glorify God. And even in something that is, ordinary that we place on our table. And this morning, the topic reminds us that the table, our table, your table, is not just a place to satisfy hunger. Table is where we eat. But that is not only the place where we satisfy hunger, but it is a sacred place where our daily choices reflects our values, our discipline, and ultimately our devotion to God. Now, Brother Kevin just read from Ecclesiastes chapter 10, verse 17, the reason for eating and drinking. Blessed art thou, O land, when thy king is the son of nobles, and thy princes eat in what? Eat in due season, for strength, and not for drunkenness. So the reason for eating and drinking is for what? For strength. Now this verse draws a contrast between eating for strength and also eating for self-indulgence. There are some people that eat to indulge themselves, but there were also people that eat to gain strength. And the Spirit of prophecy reminds us that keeping our bodies in a healthy condition is not a minor or a little matter, but it is a part of Christian duty. Now, Ellen White tells us about this, that to keep the body in a healthy condition, in order that all parts of the living machinery may act harmoniously, should be a study of our life. Do you notice that not one kind of food are suitable for every person? Some people may like this, some people may like that, some people may like that. Okay? Because there are so many varieties of food and drinks. And we have to to choose what is the best for us, according to the standard of the Bible. And should be a study of our life, I'm a Filipino, and in our country, we use much rice all the time, rice. Yeah. And in some parts of the world, they like bread. And you know that in Northeast Asia, Northwest Asia, people are subsisting on bread. Not Asians are the same. But when you come to Southeast Asia, we are fond of eating rice. Okay? So not all Asians eat the same. So you have to study your needs, and also you have to study and listen to your body. In other words, when it comes to health, it is a matter and it is a study of our life. The children of God cannot glorify Him with sickly bodies and dwarfed minds. And those who indulge in any species of intemperance, either in eating or drinking, waste their physical energies and weaken their moral powers. So we are all accountable to God. So today we will explore how our food and drink choices can strengthen not only our bodies, but also our characters, and witness and relationship with God. Now the question is, does my table reflect the honor due to God? So let us open the words of God. We open the words of God, the Bible, but not only that we must open our hearts so that we can consider how our daily habits can align with heaven's calling. Now, God approved nutrition. There's a verse in Psalms, and that is in 84 verse 11 of Psalm 84 verse 11. For the Lord God is the sun and shield. The Lord will give grace and glory, and no good thing will he withhold from them that walk uprightly. If it is good for us, God will never withhold it from us. But there are certain things that God restricted us from using because it is not good for us. Everything good, he will give it to us. Okay? In Genesis chapter 1, verse 29, at the beginning, what was the design of God for our main consumption as food? God said, "Behold, I have given you every herb bearing seed, which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree in the which is the fruit of a tree yielding seed. To you it shall be for meat." Meat here translated as food. Okay? So we learn from this verse that man, according to the divine record, that man was to eat of the products of both the field and the tree. In other words, of grains, fruits, and nuts. So they are the products of field and tree. So God gave that to us because it was good for food. It was good for our consumption, human consumption, safe for us to gain strength and to build up our body. Now, if there was a time when the diet should be of the most simple kind, it is what? It is now. Meat. Now, meat here refers to flesh meat like beef, chicken, and fish. Okay? So meat should not be placed before our children because its influence is to excite and strengthen the lower passions and has a tendency to deaden the moral powers. So in these last days, in this time, particularly, God withhold from human beings the eating of flesh food or meat. Why? Because it strengthens the lower passions of men, and also it decreases our moral powers. Grains and fruits prepared free from grease and in as natural a condition as possible should be the food for the tables of all who claim to be preparing for translation to heaven. And this is the ideal of God. He wants us to enjoy heaven, but we must practice here what are the habits of the heavenly beings. The less feverish the diet, the more easily can the passion be controlled. Gratifications of taste should not be consulted, irrespective of physical, intellectual, or moral health. So in other words, the more we align to God's ideal diet, the more we can control our temperament and our passions. Okay? So like for example, in the animal kingdom, what are what diet that's like the tigers or the lions and the hyenas, what they eat? Yes, they eat of their fellow animals. And what do you notice about their behavior? They're fierce, right? They're cruel, okay? And that's why God designed that we subsist on the natural products of the earth. But mind you, character building is a lifelong process. Some who subsist, like some who are vegetarians, can act like lions as well, right? can act like lions, can be like hyenas and tigers as well, at home. We cannot deny that. But characters are what? It takes time to change. But the more we follow God's plan on health, the more we can control that characteristics of ours. Okay, so vegetarians should put in mind that we should never act like lions or tigers or hyenas. Okay, because we don't eat meat. Okay, it is a shame, for people that knows us eating vegetarian foods, but same time acting like like lions and hyenas. No, it's a shame. But God has a purpose why He designed this diet for us in these days. What does it mean, simple? Simple diet. What does it mean, simple? Simple means natural, balanced, and uncomplicated. These are some definitions that you could find on the website these days. Simple diet meaning natural and balanced and uncomplicated. Okay? But there were times, and there was a time that God sanctioned the use of animal flesh as food. And when was the time? Yes, God permission to eat animal flesh after the flood. Recorded that the record we can find in Genesis chapter 9 from verse 1 to 3. When plant life has been all destroyed. And before the flood, humanity was intended to live solely on the product of the earth. But because after the flood, due to the lack of vegetations, it takes time for trees and vegetables to grow after the flood. So God gave them permission to eat animal flesh. God permitted the eating of clean animals that were preserved in the ark. Yes, you are correct. That's good. Now the basic principle that we have to understand these days, brethren, that we do not mark out any precise line to be followed in diet. But we do say that in countries where there are fruits, grains, and nuts in abundance, flesh food is not the right kind of food for the people of God. Okay? For places where there are abundance of fruits, grains, and nuts, then we are what? We are duty bound to subsist on those types of articles of foods. Flesh food is not the right food for God's people. Yes. Now, I have been instructed, according to these testimonies, I have been instructed that flesh food has a tendency to animalize the nature and to rob men and women of the love and sympathy which they should feel for everyone, and to give the lower passions control over the higher powers of the being. If meat eating were ever as helpful, it is not safe today. It is not safe today, brethren. Why? Many years ago, cancers, tumors, and pulmonary diseases are largely caused by meat eating. That's really the consequences. And mind you that Ellen White, when she was writing this testimony, there was no scientific findings about what cancer is, what tumor or pulmonary cancer at the time. The vision, the counsel was given to Ellen White was ahead of the time. Yes. Doctors didn't even know what cancer was, nor tumors or pulmonary diseases at the time, But she was ahead of the time. The vision was given ahead of the time to warn the people of God. Okay? And for us, today, we are waiting for the coming of Jesus Christ. Among those who are waiting for the coming of the Lord, meat eating will eventually be done away. Flesh will cease to form a part of their diet. We should ever keep this end in view and endeavor to work steadily toward it. And I cannot think, according to this testimony, that in the practice of flesh eating, we are in harmony with the light which God has been pleased to give us. So this warning was given centuries ago, or many years ago. And it is as fresh as today. Okay? Remember that God will not withhold anything from you which is good. And if God would withhold from us the eating of flesh meat, then because God knows that it is bad for us. Yes, it is bad for us. So that's why God will restrain you from taking part of that. Of course, there are so many alternatives these days, right? We call that alternatives today as mock meat, mock meat. Or what do you call that? Fake meat. But of course, they are nutritious food, contains the necessary things that our body needs. Okay? Only you have to learn how to cook them, right? And all who are connected with our health institutions like sanitariums and hospitals, doctors and nurses should especially be educating themselves to subsist on fruits, grains, and vegetables. And if we move from principles in these things, if we as Christian reformers educate our own taste and bring our diet to God's plan, we may exert an influence upon others in this matter which will be pleasing to God. The influence of the Seventh-day Adventists in the world is unimaginable with regards to this type of diet from the time it was given to the people of God. It started from Battle Creek, where the sanitarium was established, and it spread out all over the world to our days. But God wants His people to align with His plan. It has been clearly presented to me that God's people are to take a firm stand against meat eating. So if we profess to be among God's people today, we are protesting against meat eating. Not to encourage people to eat meat, but when we speak about protest, meaning we are against it. So to break it down, if we are against COVID vaccine, then we have to stand in protest against that. We should not take it. So the same thing with what? Flesh meat. We are to stand against meat eating. Protest against that. We have to take a stand against that. In other words, our diet, brethren, impacts our health, our character, our usefulness, and even our eternal destiny. And the body must be subject to the higher powers of the mind and spirit. There are cravings that challenges us, people. Cravings. Cravings for what? Of course, we crave for good and nice food. But most people are craving for meat. Okay? And this is a challenge to us. But in the Bible, there's an excellent example that gives steadfastness to took principle in eating and drinking, and the result was really excellent. In Daniel chapter 1, we always repeat that. Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with a portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank, and therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. So this record in the Bible was left for our learning. And prove thyselves. Daniel challenged the eunuch, the in charge of their education, of their training. I beseech thee 10 days, and let them give us pulse to eat and water to drink. Pulse referring to the grains, fruits, and nuts. In other words, to the seeds, which the seeds has the element of life in it. So Daniel said, give us pulse to eat and water to drink. Water is the universal drink for men and animals. In contrast with the wine that, beverages that the royals are drinking at the time. Okay? And these days, there are so many alternatives of beverages you can find in the market. Okay? But the principle stands the same. In contrast with the extravagance and gluttony of our time, we must subsist on pulse to eat and water to drink. Now here, as the result was good for Daniel and his companion, Daniel's clearness of mind and firmness of purposes, his power in acquiring knowledge and resisting temptation were due in a great degree to the plainness of his diet in connection with his life of prayer, of course. Daniel was a religious person, and he was also temperate in his habits of drinking and eating. So if you are a religious person, it should be balanced with our temperance of habits and of eating and drinking. Right? Plain, simple diet, and with his life of prayer gives him an excellent character. And the Apostle Paul, recalling the experience of the children of Israel in the wilderness because of their complaining and murmuring, this is what Paul says in a nutshell. But with many of the Israelites that came from Egypt, God was not well pleased, for they were overthrown in the wilderness. Of course, we cannot single out only one reason why the children of Israel were not able to enter the land of Canaan. Some of them died in war. Some of them, God actually died on purpose, killed on purpose, punished on purpose because of their murmuring. But many of them died because of self-indulgence in eating the wrong kind of food. So they were overthrown in the wilderness. Now, Paul continued to say here that these things were our examples to the intent we should not lust after evil things as they also lusted. Neither be idolaters, as were some of them, as it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. So indulging in perverted appetite was the problem with the children of Israel in the wilderness. And they become what? They murmur, they complain, and they even despise the type of food that God sent to them. They even said that there is nothing at all here beside this manna. And they complain. But the result of that diet for 40 years, brother, not one of those who subsist on eating of manna were sick for 40 years. Not one of them were sick or becomes feeble or weak. So that was the health benefits of partaking of the food that God gave to them. Now, and why God has to restrict us. And why God has to restrict the children of Israel? Because Satan sees that he cannot have so great power over minds when the appetite is kept under control as with this indulge. And he is constantly working to lead men to indulgence. In other words, if a person indulges much in his appetite, then Satan can have power over him readily. And under the influence of unhealthful food, the conscience becomes stupefied, the mind is darkened, and its susceptibility to impressions is impaired. So that's why Satan can control the minds of the people who indulge in their appetite. But if we restrict our appetite, Satan have less power over us, and it's easy to overcome him. Now, there are also many toxic beverages nowadays. They are spread out all over. And King Solomon gave some, warning against these intoxicants and their subtle effects. Number one on the list that he mentioned is wine. Of course, any varieties of wine or beer. Wine is a mocker, strong drink is raging, and whosoever is deceived thereby is not wise. So the Bible directly protests or stand against drinking wine, fermented wine. You know what is fermented? When you drink it, well, it does some amazing things, to the person. Yes, when you drink wine, it does some amazing things to the person. It distorts the vision. Okay? It makes all women beautiful in their sight. Yes, that can be the result. You know that? The problem is, because of heavily drinking, they don't know the way going home. Right? They don't know the way going home. I remember the experience in my neighbor in South America. He drank so heavy that he slept. He just slept before his fence, at the gate. He dropped there, dead, and slept there overnight. I passed him one time, and he said, "I am a good man, and I am not a bad man. I'm not a bad person. I'm a good man." And he is drunk. In the New Testament, brethren, the Apostle Paul said, "Be not drunk with wine, wherein is excess. There are so many supplies, but be filled with thy Spirit." And when God was to begin his deliverance of saving the children of Israel from the Philistines, he sent his trusted angels, Gabriel, to give instruction to the mother of Samson. The angel told the mother of Samson that he should be careful about what she is going to drink and eat, because the child is a special child, a Nazarite. And no wonder Samson was physically strong. Samson was born actually physically strong, physically fit. But with the power of the Spirit added to that, he became the most powerful and the strongest man. Yes. Well, some people might ask, where does the strength of Samson came from? Where do you think is the strength of Samson came from? From God. On the condition that he has to maintain his hair long. Okay? But boys, we don't recommend you to keep your hair long. Okay? Okay? Because, short hair is always the sign of masculinity. right? In our days, yeah, in our days, okay? Now, anyway, and women as well, we do not recommend women to make their hair short like men because long hair is a sign of feminism. Yes, that is a Bible concept. Okay, but let's move on here. Fermented liquor confuses the senses and perverts the powers of the being. God is dishonored when men have not sufficient respect for themselves to practice strict temperance. Fermented wine is not a natural production. The Lord never made it, and with its production, He has nothing to do. I think there's a verse in the Bible that you can say that Paul advised Timothy to take a little wine for his stomach's sake and of infirmities. But God meant what? The unfermented juice of the grape. God did not advise Timothy, or Paul did not advise Timothy to take what the Lord has prohibited. Okay? And that's the case. Now, what are these toxic beverages? I mean really toxic because they have ingredients that are not good for our body. When you look at them, it looks nice. Because many drinks today marketed as what? Pure, natural. So they are marketed and labeled as healthy, energizing, or harmless. But in reality, they can be harmful to our health, especially over time. I mean, the extreme use of them could bring really breaking down of our system. And here are some lists that I put here. I'm not saying here that you should not you condemn them altogether. But let me tell you why you have to search why they are not really healthy. You have to see for yourselves why these drinks, like energy drinks, flavored vitamins, waters, and sport drinks, bubble tea, milk tea, sounds nice, right? Fruit juices, like orange juice, pineapple juice, mango, so forth. They're commercially packaged, specialty coffees and flavored lattes, herbal teas with hidden ingredients, diet or sugar-free beverages, plant-based milks and additives. Seems good. But you might ask me why this cannot be in a long-term good for our health. Because, this is the summary, because modern drinks, this stuff that I mentioned here contains toxic mix of sugar, caffeine, artificial additives, and synthetic ingredients that over time harm our brain, heart, digestion, metabolism, and even spiritual clarity. Yes. It's always safest to choose natural, whole, and minimally processed beverages, such as pure water, fresh juice in moderation, or herbal teas with known ingredients. In other words, before you take any of those beverages, read the label. Okay? And if you don't understand the terms there, well, you have privilege or to access to some website that can tell you what are these ingredients. Okay? So this is just a warning that not all things that we saw there in the market shelves are really safe for us. That's why we need to read the labels, right? And of course, it's better to subsist in whole grains and their natural states as well. Okay. And what are operating standard procedures that we have to follow in eating and drinking. There must be some operating standard in general. So, number one, eat in due season. How many times we have to eat? How many times we have to eat in a day? Well, some people are that, you know. But look, our body, our stomach, needs, from one meal, needs to rest about 4 to 5 hours. Okay? 4 to 5 hours. Well, if you can eat 5 to 6 times a day, yeah, you have to put in between 5 to 6 hours. Right? But anyway, during the night, before you sleep, the stomach should have rest as well. So that is the ideal. Okay? And don't wake up in midnight and then go to the fridge. But there are some people like that. Okay? So we have to eat in due season for strength and not for indulgence. That's the rule. So after one meal, there should be no eating between meals. So breakfast, lunch, and dinner, there is no between meals that is recommended. That's the principle here. And therefore, the only safe course is to touch not, taste not, handle not, what? Tea, coffee, wines, tobacco, opium, and alcoholic drinks. Don't ever put them in your hands. Don't ever think of buying them. The necessity, look here. The necessity for men in this generation to call to their aid the power of the will, strengthened by the grace of God, in order to withstand the temptation of Satan and resist the least indulgence of perverted appetite, is twice as great as it was several generations ago. The present generation have less power of self-control than had those who lived then. Yes. In other words, we are living in a weaker generation. Probably the weakest of all generations we live here today. So the weak we are, the more we pray, the more we call the grace of God to help us. And especially in resisting the perverted appetite. That's why the safest course we recommend is that touch not, handle not, or taste not, or handle not this stuff. Now, let's move on to Isaiah chapter 55. What it says here is that eat only that which is good. Eat the things that it is good. That's why I said to you, when you go to the shelves, when you go to the shop, read the labels. Yeah? Because you don't know what is in there. That's why you have to read labels. And also we can learn from other people who are health conscious, who practice healthy living, so we can observe from them. And eat only that which is good. And let your soul delight itself in fatness. Enjoy things that which is good for our body. And what is one of the things that not good? And the Bible prohibits this one. And what is this thing? It is good neither to eat flesh, nor to drink wine, nor anything whereby thy brother stumbleth, or is offended on, or is made weak. So what do you understand here? In the New Testament, the Bible encourages us to let go of flesh meat. It is good not to eat flesh meat. not to drink wine, nor so on. You see that? So the Bible is full of counsel in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. So those foods should be chosen that best supplies the element needed for building up the body. In this choice, appetite is not a safe guide, because through wrong habits of eating, the appetite has become perverted. Often it demands food that impairs health and causes weakness instead of strength. You know, it is easy for us to crave for something that destroys our health. Good things? No. Sometimes we have to convince and educate ourselves on what to eat the best for us. Okay? And we cannot safely be guided by the customs of society. The customs of society, most people are what? Eating meat. Yeah, you cannot be influenced by that. The disease and sufferings that everywhere prevail are largely due to popular errors in regard to diet, eating or drinking, or whatever it is. I have a friend, brethren, my fellow countryman that was in South America. We meet him in a regular basis almost every Saturday. And he always smoke. And he said, well, and it's hard for him to take away cigarettes. His reason in his mind is that if he stopped smoking, his lungs would collapse. Well, that is his mentality. And we cannot be governed by that mentality either. Yeah? Because disease and suffering that everywhere prevail are due to popular errors in regards to diet. Will our people see and feel the sin of indulging perverted appetite? And how does perverted appetite manifested? Well, they discard tea, coffee, flesh meats, and all stimulating food and devote the means expended for these harmful indulgences to spreading the truth. So perverted appetite and eating and drinking of tea, coffee, and flesh meats, they are all associated. So we can say that those who eat meat, they have a perverted appetite. And that perverted appetite is just as natural for them. So it takes actually time for education. It takes time for them to change and a mental alignment to consider that natural craving as perverted appetite. God has furnished man with abundant means for the gratification of an unperverted appetite. He has spread before him the products of the earth, a bountiful variety of food that is palatable to the taste and nutritious to the system. And especially these days, brethren, most of the things that we eat from the market in New Zealand, they are from other countries. You notice that? And there are many stuff that comes here from other countries. So we don't have excuse. We don't have excuse here because so many are flowing to our market these days. That's why, well, of course, we only complain about expensive price. But as to the variety of food, we have them all in abundance, right? In Australia and New Zealand. So those who use flesh meats freely do not always have an unclouded brain and an active intellect, because the use of the flesh of animals tends to cause a grossness of body and to benumb the finer sensibilities of the mind. The liability to disease is increased by eating flesh. So the more you eat meat or flesh, the more liability you have to be infected by diseases. Okay. And we do not hesitate to say that meat is not essential to the maintenance of health and strength. So if you ask me if meat is necessary, no. There are many substitutes for that. So, my friends and brothers and sisters, God's plan for our health is not a burden. Is it a burden to you or not? This plan of God for our health, is it a burden to you or not? This should not be a burden, because what is for our good should not be a burden. It is a blessing to us. It is a blessing for everyone and not a burden. From the fruits of Eden, grains and nuts included, to the call to avoid intoxicating and artificial stimulants, the Lord is leading us towards a lifestyle that honors Him in body, mind, and spirit. So God is actually leading us to a better life. God is saying that we have to enjoy life abundantly, but that life should be free from disease, should be a healthy life. That's an abundant life we have to enjoy. Well, I like to, I wish I could live longer in this earth. But I don't wish to live in a sickly life. I want to live a healthy life that could, that I am able to dress up myself. I could able to help others. I could still work, do the things. That's the life we want. Do activities and help others. But that should be a healthy life, not a sickly one. Now, in our world today that is filled with deceptive choices and addictive indulgences, we are called to be like Daniel, with a purpose in our hearts not to defile ourselves with what weakens the body and clouds the mind. So dare to be like Daniel, dare to stand alone. Our food and drink choices are not just about health. They are a reflection of our character, a matter of obedience, and a part of our preparation for heaven. So as we seek to glorify God in all things, let us remember, Paul says in 1 Corinthians 10, verse 31, whether therefore you eat or drink or whatsoever you do all to the glory of God. For the Lord is a sun and a shield. The Lord will give grace and glory, and no good thing will He withhold from them that walk uprightly. So may our tables, our choices, and our lives be a testimony of faith, discipline,